Hello everyone and welcome back to Java Man Teaches. In this episode we're going to be selecting an IDE, we're going to be learning about variables and scope in Java. We'll be writing a simple program demonstrating the different types of variables in Java, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to select an IDE to use for the duration of this series. So an IDE is an integrated development environment. What this means is that you have this program which you can write all your applications in, and it will handle all the compilation and things like checking the code for syntax errors and giving you warnings and hints about how you can write the code a little bit better or places that you're going wrong, for example. It does all that for you in the background and kind of serves the final application to you in a nice bundle once it's built it. So there's a few choices that we can do for an IDE. So let's take a look at them. If I just open this tab up here. The first one, and this is probably one of the more popular IDEs, is called Eclipse, and Eclipse has been around for generations. It really is one of these IDEs which has always been there, will always be there, and just keeps getting better basically with every release that they do. And this is actually the IDE that I use kind of day in day out at work and for my own personal projects. And it really is a very good IDE, and by all means you guys can use this IDE. However, for learning and for starting out, I'm not going to recommend this IDE because I want to have something a little bit simpler, and I think that there is another IDE which lets us have the simplicity but also kind of like the power of Eclipse as well, and I think that's NetBeans. And NetBeans is again a very popular IDE. I think it's also the one that can come pre-packaged with the JDK. It's kind of the one that Oracle tried to bootleg. In fact, it says at the bottom here it's sponsored by Oracle. So this is the one that I'm going to recommend that we use, purely because it's very simple, but it's also very powerful. There are other ones, of course, that you can use. There's another one up here called IntelliJ, and IntelliJ is kind of a new IDE, well, it's a fairly new IDE. It's actually there is a fork of IntelliJ that I use, and that's called Android Studio, and it's based off IntelliJ. IntelliJ is a very nice IDE. I don't personally use it. I'm sure when I was initially looking at IntelliJ, it was a paid only application. They have since released an open source version which is free to use, but it doesn't contain a lot of the stuff that I like. For example, Grails and Enterprise Edition Java. So IntelliJ is good, but for all the features you do have to pay for it, and for now I'm not going to. There are some other IDEs, or I don't know if you can call them IDEs really. These are just text editors with lots of fancy features, and one of those is Atom, and it's a very nice text editor. I'm sure later on in the series we'll use this actually for when we write JavaScript and sort of HTML front ends and things like that. And there's another one as well which I use, which is called Sublime, and this is just another very nice text editor basically. It has lots of nice features in that one. But for now, if you want to download NetBeans, now we might as well bite the bullet here and just get the full version, which is 277 megs, but we might as well do it. It's got everything in it, and we are going to need everything when we're by the end of this course. Okay, so I'll let this download and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, that's finished downloading now, so I'm just going to open it up and start the installation. So once you open it up on a Mac, you get this installation screen. So we'll just go ahead and install that. Just opened on the other screen. There we go. We'll just go through this, just accept licenses, agree that. Yeah, that's fine to install there. And then now we will just write these files. And I'll close this browser in the meantime while this is installing. Okay, so that was installed successfully. And then I'm just going to move that to the trash. I don't need the package anymore. Seems to be going very slowly. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to search for NetBeans and we're going to open it. And then it's going to say here that, oh, right, okay, so it's just said that it's just found a previous install. So I'm just going to ignore that. And then it's loaded up here. So here it is. So what we're going to do now, so this is NetBeans' default screen. It's called the start page. I'm going to ignore all of this and I'm just going to close it down because I don't particularly want to see that. So just give you a brief overview of what's happening here. Projects is where the main stuff is going to be. This is where our Java source files are going to be once we've created a project. Files is basically an unordered version of projects, so it's just going to show all the root files. And services, you don't need to worry about services for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new project, a new Java project into NetBeans. And the way we do that in NetBeans is by clicking this orange box up at the top left corner here. So we click on that, and I am just going to pick a Java application here and Java application there. Now you see that there's quite a lot of options for me to choose from, but for now let's just pick Java application. Click next. And this is going to go and find the JRE and the JDK and sort of initialize NetBeans for you. And you can see down here it says it's building something. So our first project, and I'll just explain this screen a little bit. Basically what we've got here is the project name is obviously going to be the project name. The location is going to be where it's going to be stored on the disk. Project folder is going to be the basically where that source is going to be kept. And then there's this checkbox here which says create main class, and what it can do is it can generate that main class that we wrote in the last episode for you automatically. I'm going to uncheck that, and for the name of the project I'm going to change that to, I'm going to change this folder here to JMT, wherever it is here. And I've got episode 2 there, so I'm going to open that. And I'm going to change the name to, well, I'm going to call it variables. Not a great name for a class, but that's what we're going to be looking at in this episode is variables. So if we finish that, what it's going to do is it's going to create us a new project, and you get 2 folders within that project, or it structures it into 2 folders. You've got libraries and you've got source packages. Now our source packages is empty, and our libraries has one thing in there, and that's we're using the JDK 1.8 library, and that's it. And that's always there by default. I mean, you may have a different version. You may have 1.7 or 1.6 or something like that, but by default the JDK will always be there. If for some reason you're getting class not found exceptions, make sure that you've got your JDK there. For whatever reason, sometimes it might disappear, you might have deleted it by accident. That is always a number one thing to look at. What's my JDK? What version is it? So anyway, we've now got this empty project, okay, and we've got a few buttons on the top panel here. This one at the side here, this is your build button. Then there's a clean and build. So I'll just explain the difference between these. So the build is basically to compile the project. Clean and build deletes the old built project and then rebuilds it. Run here is to show the output of the project. Yeah. So it's run basically does a clean build and then runs the project as well. Debug means that basically in Java you can do what we call breakpoints, where if you want the program to stop at a particular point so you can inspect what is happening at that particular time, you can run it as a breakpoint. And the last one is a profile run. So profile is to look at what's running quickly or slowly, basically to have a look at how efficient your code is. For now, we're only going to we'll use the run button. We will use the debug at some point, but for now we're just going to use run. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new class into here. Okay, and it's going to be a new Java class, and a class. In fact, no, there'll be a new Java main class, because then we can skip a step by writing the main method. In fact, no, let's do a Java class. So we'll call this class. Class names always begin with a capital. We'll call it variables. And package is how you basically structure your code. I typically do a few different packages for things like data, for views, for controllers and things like that. So, but for now, we're just going to throw everything into the default package, because Java's not gonna mind that it doesn't have a package basically. So we'll keep that blank, and it's going to tell us that we're going to create a new file in variables source variables.java. So we'll finish that. So now we've got this class, and you notice how I didn't select a main class. That basically means the only difference is that it hasn't basically created a method for me, which is the main method. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to write that main method now. So we'll say public static void main. Now, as I'm typing this, you may notice that there are red things coming, red little warning signs coming up, and you see this is saying, oh, I expected an open bracket here, but I didn't get one, and that's because we've got this declaration here which isn't valid yet. So it's going to say, oh, I'm expecting either a semicolon, or I'm missing a method body, or you need to declare it as abstract, and I'll talk about abstract later. But basically, this NetBeans is validating the code as we go. Okay. So this is our main method. This is going to be the method that gets called by the JVM at runtime. So this is our entry point. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to write the same program as the last episode first, just to make sure that everything is working and everything is running properly. Now you see, as I typed in system dot, NetBeans has opened up this this list here, and this list is basically all the things that can come after system dot, or it's a selection of stuff. So I know that print line is in the system.out variable, so system.out dot, and then I can call the print line method. Now, print line, as you can see, has a few different ways of being called. These are all the different ways that you can call a print line method. Now, these are called signatures. These are called method signatures. These are how these methods are defined. These are all different methods. So you can call it with no arguments. You can call it with an object. You can call it with a string, a boolean, a character, an array of characters, a double, a float, an int, and a long. Okay. For now, we're going to pass in this. Oops. Hello world. And you'll see that NetBeans has already put the semicolon in for me. If I delete that semicolon, it'll go red because it'll go, oh, I was expecting a semicolon here. Okay. So we'll just format that a bit nicely. So if we save that, what you'll notice now is because this method has been inserted into our class, NetBeans has gone, oh, I realise that this is now a main class. So I'm going to put a little play button because it's, if you hover over it, it says contains main class. So this is our main class now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run it, and it's going to say, oh, can you just pick the main class for me? And I'm going to say, yes, there it is. And then our output is here, hello world. And I can show you that's the real output, because if I add a 1 to the end of that, it's going to produce the same output. Okay, so that's NetBeans and an IDE. So now that we've created our Hello World application in NetBeans, we're going to now move on to Java data types, or more importantly, primitive data types. And primitive data types are ones that are supplied to us as developers by Java itself, by the language itself. These are reserved words in Java, so you can't call variables with these words, and they are basically, they're built into Java. So and these are called keywords as well. So some keywords, for example, all the keywords here are in blue. So whenever you see blue writing in NetBeans, it means it's a keyword. Okay. So there's a few different data types in Java, and the first that I'll talk about is a Boolean data type. And a Boolean data type is one where it only accepts 2 values, okay? I'm just going to format this a little bit nicely. It only accepts 2 values, and the value can either be true or it can be false, and this is represented in Java by literally the words true or false. In terms of, if you're interested in memory and in terms of bit size, this takes up 1 bit because it's either a 1 or it's a 0. So to declare a Boolean, what we're going to do is, or a Boolean variable, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable inside the main method, and to do this is going to be what we call a local variable, because this variable will only be accessible within the main method. Okay, so to do that, you just type in Boolean, and we'll call it a Boolean. Okay. And this Boolean can take a value of either true, all right, Lord, can't type, true, or it can take the value false. Okay, so if I move it back to true, that's our Boolean. The next primitive in terms of size, well, if I scale them up, is a byte, and a byte is a number or an integer, which basically it's an 8-bit integer. So the maximum size of a byte is 255. But Java does this thing where it signs its variables, which means that they can have negative numbers as well as positive numbers. So instead of it being from 0 to 255, your actual range is from minus 128 to 127. Okay. So to represent a byte, what we're going to do is we're going to say byte, a byte equals, and then this can take anything from minus 128, yeah, all the way to 127. Now you notice that NetBeans realizes that a byte can only be up to 127. So when I try to put 128 in, it's going to say, hold on, you've got an incompatible type here, because you're trying to convert basically what it says here is an int to a byte, and I'll talk about an int next. But if I put a comment in here, so the other thing is comments in Java are done by two slashes. This is called an inline comment, right? So there's another type of comment, which is a block comment, and that is done here by using a slash and a star, or slash and an asterisk, and then it's finished by saying an asterisk and a slash. And that's a block comment. And there's another type of comment which has 2 stars, right? And what this means is it's a Java doc comment. And a Java doc means that you can basically give some instructions on how to use a particular method or a class, and that comment will appear in the IDE when you hover over that class, for example, like that now. So if you basically, a Java doc is one that is visible on the class. So a byte can go from minus 127 all the way to 128. Okay. The next type of variable is a short. Okay, and a short is a 16-bit integer. So these are all integer numbers up to now. So, and what I mean by integer is it's a whole number. There's no floating point. So you can't say 23.4 in them. So a short is defined like this. And a short, because it's 16-bit, it can go from something like minus 32,768. That's its minimum. And its maximum in that case is 32,767. Yeah. So that's a short, and that is twice the size of a byte, half the size of an int. So the range of that is 32,768 and to 32,767. So the next one is an int. And an int is a 32-bit integer. And int literally stands for integer. So int, integer. And this one, I'm going to have to look this one up, because this one ranges from, well, it's a 32-bit range, so it goes from negative 2,147,000, 147,000,000 483,648, and we'll leave it as that because I'm not typing the rest of it. But that's the negative range, and that goes all the way to essentially the same, but 2,147,483,647 is where that ranges up to. And then you've got a long, and a long again is an integer, but it's a 64-bit integer, and I'm not going to type in the whole value of that because it is massive. But that one is very large. Long is the biggest value that we can represent in terms of an integer. So that's 64-bit. So we'll just say 1 for that. But that one is, in fact, what we could do is see a long. When you're defining longs as numbers, then what you have to do is you have to put an L at the end. And that tells NetBeans and Java that this number is not being represented as an int. And an int is basically the default number representation in Java. Unless you want it to allocate less memory, then you use a short. If you want it to allocate even less, then you'd use a byte. But unless you define it as a long, then you'll get these exceptions where if you try and define it more than what an integer is, even though you're writing it into a long, then NetBeans will complain. And that goes from negative large to positive large again. It's very big along, absolutely massive. Then we've got another 2 types of number representation in Java. Now, one of them is the smaller one, and that one is a float. And a float is basically a 32-bit floating point number. So this means that you can have decimal places at the end of your number. So you could say our float equals 32.765 f, and that's perfectly valid. The other one is a double, and a double is basically a 64-bit float essentially, and this one is exactly the same. So you could say some kind of declaration like that. Notice here I'm not putting a D, I think it is, at the end, because it's not required because this is not bigger than 32-bit. But anyway, it's good practice to put a D and an F at the end of defining these variables. So they're our number representations. Now there is one other primitive type, and that is this. This is a char, and this is basically a character. Okay, so a character can be anything which is in the Unicode character, basically. And a character is a little bit different to a string because it's denoted by single quotes. Okay, so instead of doing double quotes, it's single quotes. Now, that's Java's primitive types. Now there is one more type which is strictly not a primitive, but you can use it in the same way as you would use primitive types, and really there's not much of a distinction between this type and the primitives that we have, and that is the string type. And you can see it at the top here. You see, string is basically just an array of chars, but Java have packaged up basically this class, and it is a class, and the way that you know it's a class is it extends object. You can see there it says it extends object, and all classes basically extend object. Object is the root class. So this string can do something which you can't do with normal objects, which you can define it by just using the equal sign. And the equal sign in Java is not called equals. I'm not saying here our string equals Bob. What I'm actually saying is our string assign Bob, right? And this basically means take this value on the right hand side, and put it in the memory location of this variable string. So it's called a assign. Okay. And that's basically it for our primitive data types. You can once these have been defined, you can change them. You can manipulate them. So, for example, the Boolean, if down here, instead of it being true, you wanted it to be false, then you don't have to declare Boolean again. You can just say a Boolean equals false, and that's it, and that's valid. Now, this won't produce any output, but we can run it, and it will build successfully, which confirms to us that it is a valid program, and it's not got any errors in it. Now, the last thing that I want to cover in this episode is scope. And scope is important in Java because you need to understand where things are going to be accessible from. Okay. Now, I have declared a load of variables here. Okay. Now, these variables are what we call local variables. That is because I can only use these variables within this method called main. If I had another method here, which was called public void use Boolean, okay, and I try to use this variable called our Boolean. So if I try to say here our Boolean equals false, I can't do that because it's going to say I don't know where that is, cannot find symbol. I can't find this variable called our Boolean because it's not in this scope. And a scope is basically the curly braces here. Okay. Now, of course, if you did want it to be in this scope, then what you could do is make it to be a class variable. And the way that we can do that is by saying, and for now I'll make this static because we're going to be calling it from a static method. So what we can do is public static Boolean, a Boolean equals, or we'll leave it undefined. And now here it's going to say that that this local variable is hiding a field variable or a class variable. And that's because I've redeclared our Boolean as a local variable, but it's not needed because I've already got a field variable named our Boolean. So there we go. So we've got this variable our Boolean now, and you see now this is turned green because it can now access it because it's no longer on the just limited to this method. It's now a class variable. So that's basically it for scope, and I think that takes us to the end of this lesson. I hope you all enjoyed it. In our next lesson, we'll be talking about arrays and some more complex data structures within Java and how we can store many of these primitive variables in kind of containers. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please hit the like button. And also, if you want to see more of this kind of video and want to keep learning more about Java, then please hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get as many of these videos out as soon as possible, and they will be being uploaded fairly regularly, I hope. Okay, thank you very much, and goodbye.